Okay.
Okay, so just to give you a sense of where I'm going, um, I wanted to give you first just a brief introduction to community land trusts in general, and then to talk about why home ownership is important to community land trusts and also to Homestead. And then I'll talk a little bit more about Homestead specifically. Um, then I want to give you a little bit of background into financing affordable home ownership, sort of the economics of it. And then we can talk a little bit more interactively about your questions and the process for working together. Do I have your permission to follow that order of service, as it were?
That sounds great. Thank you, Kathleen.
Great, wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to also just visually, I'm going to narrate what's on the slides so that everybody who's not able to actually see the slides knows what we're pointing at. I've got a slide up here that has a hand, two hands holding dirt and a house. And this is a slide that says, what is a community land trust? It is a membership-based nonprofit organization that acquires and uses land specifically to benefit low and moderate income people and neighborhoods. Most often it's used for creating housing, but homestead, it can be used for a variety of things: agricultural land, urban agriculture, cultural spaces. But homestead focuses on affordable home ownership, and I'll tell you a little bit more about why that's the case in a few minutes. Community land trusts were created in the 1960s by civil rights era leaders when Black sharecroppers were evicted from their homes and farms for registering to vote. What you see on the screen is a mural on the side of a building that says "New Communities, Little Farmers Market, Meat and Groceries." New Communities was the very first community land trust, and it was formed in response to Black sharecroppers being thrown off their land for registering to vote. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee volunteers were active in the South at the time, engaging Black people to enroll to vote. And in Albany, Georgia, when that happened, there was this wholesale displacement of Black sharecroppers in retaliation for registering. And so leaders there, which included Charles and Shirley Sherrod, who you may have heard of, Representative John Lewis, who was the late John Lewis, who was there at the same time, and a cousin of Martin Luther King, of Black sharecroppers in retaliation for registering. And so leaders there, which included Charles and Shirley Sherrod, who you may have heard of, Representative John Lewis, who was the late John Lewis, who was there at the same time, and a cousin of Martin Luther King Jr., Slater King. Sorry?
Go ahead.
Okay. Slater King, they had been researching a model for community land trusts, and this placement of folks in Albany, Georgia was the triggering event that caused them to create new communities. They pooled resources. They got enough money to buy 5,000 acres of land, and they created this model. The current slide shows people in meetings, planning and thinking together. And you can see Charles and Shirley Sherrod in these emails, or on the slide rather. The original model they created was collective ownership of land with individual ownership of homes, farms, and businesses on the land. And that model was designed to prevent this displacement. If you're owning land collectively, no one individual can get thrown off the land for a variety of reasons. And it will also allow people to own assets on the land and thereby build wealth. And that model is a genius, anti-racist, multicultural model that has stood the test of time as being a great tool to continue to prevent displacement and allow people to build wealth through ownership, even though the reasons for displacement have changed depending on where the community land trust is. There's no longer wholesale displacement of people for social justice reasons like that. It's more gentrification and development in communities that causes that displacement. So community land trust home ownership, which is what we embrace, makes and keeps homes affordable perpetually. It stabilizes households and neighborhoods. It prevents income displacement. It creates wealth building opportunities that creates economic mobility for owners and their children. And it addresses the racial and social equity goals of access to opportunity and also voice in governance. The reason that Homestead focuses on home ownership points to what's on the slide right now, which is this is a comparison of Black net worth and Hispanic net worth with white net worth. And although the date of this research, 2013, was is 9 years old, the disparities between Black net worth and white net worth and Hispanic net worth and white net worth are the same. And for it's essentially that white net worth is 13 times that of Black net worth, and it is 10 times greater than Hispanic net worth. And the reason for that is that Hispanic, Latinx folks, and Black people have not been, have a history of being shut out of owning assets, both businesses and homes. So then the next slide is, we're talking about what it means to try to buy a home in Seattle. So we have a legacy of being shut out of owning, which has meant lack of building intergenerational wealth. Now you've got this ridiculous runaway housing market that we deal with in King County, and actually across the street, across the state rather. And the fact of the matter is that housing and homeownership in particular in King County is extremely expensive. The numbers that you see on the screen are as of the end of year 2021. They show that between 2014 and 2021, home prices increased 72% and income theoretically increased 31%. However, I don't know if you know anybody whose real income increased 31% between 2014 and 2021. That number is skewed by higher wage tech workers entering King County. So the real growth in income is about a third of that for everyday people. What this chart also shows is that the gray line at the bottom is the home that people we serve can afford. And that has always been, and the difference between that and the blue line is what a market rate home costs in our county. So back in 2014, there was a $220,000 difference between the home that was affordable and what market rate price homes could have cost. Flash forward to 2021, that gap has increased by 440,000 to 440,000. So it's doubled. The gap between what median home prices cost and what is affordable to the people we serve has increased. The gap has increased by that much. And this chart also shows the middle line, which is orange or red, depending on your screen. It shows that even median income households, so not even lower income households, the median income finds home prices unaffordable. So this is a problem. Housing affordability is affecting everybody in King County unless you are a very high wage worker or you already own your home. So the prices that are affordable to the income category we serve, 50 to 80% AMI. You can see on this slide, what I'm showing is that the range from 50 to 80% AMI for a 3-person household is somewhere between $52,000 and $81,000 a year annual salary. And the home price that's affordable to a 3-person household with that income ranges from $224,000 to $380,000 about. So home prices, King County, upper 700s, low 800s now. But this is the price that's actually affordable to folks who are teachers, firefighters, high-tech work, not high-tech, healthcare workers, nonprofit employees of various kinds, first responders, the people that repair your power lines when a storm happens. These folks are making this type of income, and they're entirely shut out of the communities that they work in. So all of this combined, this legacy of discrimination and systemic inequities in housing, plus then our high cost market, mean that we have dramatic racial disparities in home ownership rates in King County. And what you're seeing on the slide now is you can see that white non-Hispanic people have a 63% home ownership rate compared to 34% for Hispanic or Latinx people, 29% Black or African American. Overall, the BIPOC home ownership rate in King County is 26% compared to the 63% white home ownership. So now I'm pivoting a little bit to what Homestead does. What we do is we either build new homes or we rehabilitate existing homes. We fundraise to subsidize the price to what's affordable. And usually we are not subsidizing all the way from market rate down to what's affordable. We're trying to acquire homes either through new construction or donated homes and that type of thing. So we're usually subsidizing about $260,000 per home to get the homes down to the right price. Then, as part of our model, the land under the home is held in trust and is stewarded collectively by the land trust. And owners then lease their land for a small monthly fee. In exchange for getting that great very low price on a home, then they agree to restrict their equity gain to a formula resale price so that the home will stay affordable when they go to sell to the next income qualified buyer. And this works really well. We have 235 homes in trust now, of which about a quarter have been owned by more than one family. So over a period of 60 or so resales, we have shown that the model really works to perpetuate affordability and create first-time home buying opportunities for people whose only other alternative, frankly, is renting. And really important for our model, this is what differentiates us from other home ownership programs that might arise on a nonprofit basis, is that we are an ally model. It is our own homeowners that are the members of Homestead, and they execute governance oversight on the board, and they serve on the board themselves. And it is the members that direct who is elected to the board and who the officers are. And then it's the board that oversees me, and I oversee the staff. But this method of having the members make key decisions about Homestead and having a third of the seats on the board be our own homeowners centers their voice in governance. And that's part of the anti-racist and multicultural model that we inherited from those civil rights era leaders back in the 60s. The other things that we do to make sure homes stay permanently affordable is that we really invest in the front end of helping buyers be really ready to buy a home. So we do a lot of education and pre-purchase support. We make sure that they've asked themselves, is home ownership right for me? We don't want to pathologize people on the basis of, you must own a home. For some people, rental housing is the right choice, and we want them to make that decision based on good information. But we also, if it is right for them and they proceed, we want to provide purchase support and connect them with home buyer education. We have a home buyer club that's part of our outreach. And we also want to make sure they understand what it means to be part of an HOA, because many of the developments that we're building now have homeowners associations or condos associations in them. We also provide a lot of post-purchase support. And if any homeowners in our program start to experience financial distress or they need help maintaining their home, we provide resources, and we do some case management to make sure that they get back on their feet and get the help that they need. As a result, we have an extremely low foreclosure rate, less than 1%. That's the lowest of any homeownership program in Kenya. We have a variety of different types of homes in our trust. We have scattered site, single family detached homes. We just finished building Willowcrest in Renton, which is a townhome development. We're just in the process of finishing up our Village Gardens project in the Central District. We will break ground on the Riverton Cascade development in Tukwila next month or in May. And then we're developing a couple of condo buildings in Finney Ridge. So you can see all different product types at work here. And I wanted to just also say that our work is positioned in a larger context of something that's called the just transition to a new economy. Have any of you heard of a just transition to a new economy?
No.
It's a really helpful framework that acknowledges, we have an economic system that works for us, and the point is just to make it better and to make sure that it's more fair. So there's a strong emphasis on more collective ownership and collective governance of businesses, land, housing. And so we live into that framework, and I'm happy to talk about that more, but it's just to help you see that this is, Community Land Trusts are part of a larger context and movement around justice. Environmental stewardship is another part of the just transition to a new economy, and that's a very important part of how we build our homes. But the most important thing about that is the Community Land Trust model basically is removing land from the speculative market. We are taking land off the speculative market permanently, and thereby creating this stable, affordable trust of homes that can stay affordable forever. Anti-displacement is a really important thing. So as you get immersed in racial justice conversations, displacement of people of color from their neighborhoods is an important part. It's a big part of how we think about where we develop. This is what you're seeing in front of you right now is a heat map from the city of Seattle. of where displacement is expected to occur as a result of the upzones that were done a couple of years ago. So what you can see on this slide is that there are black dots all over the map of Seattle, and those are where our homes already are. And you'll notice that they are in those areas that are marked red primarily, because and those are the red areas are where displacement is projected to occur. So we're really happy that we have a beachhead in those neighborhoods that are gentrifying, and we want to do more of that, making sure that folks have a chance to remain in their communities as the communities revitalize. We also care deeply about creating opportunities for people to come back or to enter neighborhoods where they were redlined out before. And that's why we're developing in the Finney neighborhood. We have the opportunity to create something like 30 new permanently affordable homes on Finney Ridge, and we're working with community groups there who want to welcome more diverse residents and owners into that neighborhood, something that was not possible because of racial covenants and redlining in those areas. So as I mentioned, we have, I'm on a slide that has some stats about us. We have 235 homes in trust. Last year, we had 22 first-time homebuyers join our program. We have a 57% BIPOC homeownership rate of people in our homes. And in 2021, we had 0 foreclosures. We ran 2 homebuyer clubs last year. And we have, we've engaged a bunch of agencies to help us to do culturally appropriate outreach. We have a waiting list of 1,500 households already interested in our program, and we just can't build fast enough. What you see on this slide is basically the growth of our trust and our projected growth with the projects we know about, taking us into 2025. And so we're actively developing and have a pipeline of homes for new construction. So I wanted to stop talking about Homestead per se and start talking a little bit about how we finance home ownership, because I think this goes to the conversation of like what you can expect from a developer like ourselves in terms of value for your land and what we can build on your site and what we can give back to you in a development process. So one of the key points is how do we make things affordable? We're basically solving for income, for that 50 to 80% area median income. And 2 different methodologies are what have been used in the past. One you've probably heard of called down payment assistance, which is filling the gap. So it's sometimes also called shared appreciation. Usually it's a loan to the buyer, and it closes the gap between that market rate price and then what's affordable. And it gets repaid when the person sells the home, repaid with interest. The model that we use is permanent affordability, which is we don't subsidize the gap between market price and what's affordable. We actually subsidize the home itself so that it is affordable. And then we artificially restrict the equity gain on the home to a formula that allows people to get a fair return. They build equity, about $7,000 a year of equity, but that formula keeps the home affordable when they sell to the next income qualified buyer. It's important to understand in the current environment that down payment assistance doesn't work. It used to work really well. Back when what I'm showing on the screen right now is a trend line of median home prices, the price that a median household could afford, and then the affordable pricing, the pricing that's needed to serve our owners. Way back in 1996, it wasn't hard for a lower income family to stretch up, kind of, bootstrap their way to home ownership because the median home price wasn't that different from their income. But in about 2002, you saw the gap between median home prices and what people could afford. The gap was about $100,000. So models like homesteads in about 2002 were about bringing that much subsidy to a home purchase. And that's how we did it. We actually got money. People would qualify to our program, then they would go out on the open market and find a home. And then we would bring that down payment assistance to them. And the home would come into the trust in that way. But since about then, the run up of costs of median price of home has outstripped income growth so significantly that we have these gaps between what's affordable and what people can afford of $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. So no amount of down payment assistance, or I should say it differently, down payment assistance in $100,000 increments isn't enough to close that gap. So that's why, as this trend line has continued to escalate, we have said we have to just build these homes ourselves. We have to do new construction, and we have to build them as a nonprofit builder at a price that gets us much closer to what's affordable. So what we do is this line at the top of the screen now, let's say whatever the cost is with current labor and materials, there's a cost to the CLT to build or rehab a home. And then there's that amount that's a low to moderate income person can afford and to pay for through their mortgage. Then the difference between those is what we have to fill with gifts, grants, or subsidies. So I've got a slide up here that shows kind of the current numbers. Market rate prices now are in Seattle are like $850,000. And let's just say the numbers can move around a lot, but let's just say that what an affordable household, low-income household could pay was $290,000. So that's their mortgage, right? They go out, they get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, just like everybody does. They can pay that much towards the cost of a home. We can build them for about $550,000. We can build townhomes for about $550,000. But to do that, what we have to do is we have to go out and get public subsidies, either city funds. We're really lucky in the city of Seattle that we have really good levy funding, and please support your local housing levy when it comes up for renewal, or county funds. There are state funds. There are funds from different sources like something called the Federal Home Loan Bank. And there's federal funds, and we get land donations. But even with all those known sources, there's always an additional gap that we have to go out and figure out how to close on our own with not being sure. So we're having to fundraise around $260,000 per home in order to make our program work. And we're doing that, but that's what it takes. So, so as we start to talk about developing homes on your land, even when we have lower cost land, we still have to go out and fundraise. It's not like we're affordable. We're not like for-profit housing developers that are going to make a bunch of money on top of the homes we sell. And there's no big gravy train for affordable housing that makes this pencil. We take on the responsibility of building the homes, going out and getting that subsidy, and trying to make the public subsidy work so that the project is fully paid for. One of the things that we proposed with you is we're doing mixed income, and that's another way to do the that's another form of subsidy of like you sell some of the homes at market rate in order to finance the affordable units. So that's in the mix of the different options that we sent you. Just a brief aside, we did a report on the scarcity of homes, the lack of homes that are affordable to folks. You can look this up, but there's a nice downloadable report about how difficult it is to buy a home in King County because there just aren't homes to buy that are the right price point. So I can stop there and see if you have any questions about Homestead, our work, before we go on and talk about the original proposal process and then how we go forward together.
Thank you.
Okay, so questions? Raise your reaction hand, your computerized hand. I'm sorry, what? Oh, Laura, go ahead.
I had just two questions. One is your handouts are quite helpful. Are they something that we'll be able to put on the site or have a copy of?
Sure.
Okay. And then the other question that had come up that I heard a little bit about was why the particular percentage of affordable median income at the 60 to 80%, and what issues would arise if you tried to go lower than that?
Yeah, the challenge is that there just isn't subsidy to do it. We work really hard to get it down to, we target to get to 65% AMI, but it's all a function of how much subsidy that we can have. We can't control our cost of labor and our cost of materials. The only way we can drive down the price further is through subsidy, and there's a limited amount of subsidy that we can secure.
Okay, so Steve or Bix, question from you guys?
Yeah, hey there, it's James here, or Bix. So my question had to do with the diagram showing the risk, the level of risk in the different neighborhoods. I was just curious about that because it didn't look like the level of risk in our neighborhood was like medium. And I was wondering if what the significance of that is and if there is really a significance.
Well, it says that when push comes to shove, if we had the choice to do work in an area of high displacement and a place where there wasn't displacement, and we couldn't do both, we would default to the neighborhood that was at highest risk of displacement. However, we're not in a position where we have to choose right now. We can be active in all kinds of neighborhoods, and we have the opportunity to increase diversity in neighborhoods where perhaps the diversity hasn't been as much as it would have been otherwise. So it doesn't mean that we don't want to work with you. It just means that when we can prevent displacement, that's our preference.
Okay, Anita, thank you, Kathleen. Anita, and then Joanne.
That was part of my question, I guess, is that this is not an area which it's always been relatively high-end economically, and there really isn't a population that has been displaced. Why would one choose this neighborhood? But I understand what you're saying is that right now you have a number of, you have, am I understanding this right? You have enough funds that you can target even a neighborhood like this, which is not particularly prone to displacement. And I have a question about the diversity other than economic, that these are people who would not normally afford home ownership in Seattle. Do you seek diversity in other ways? Do you have other guidelines for people that are buying the homes in this project?
Yeah, we generally speaking, obviously we're looking for the economic characteristic of being low or moderate income, but we do want to lower barriers to people who have been historically shut out of homeownership. We're not, as a fair housing organization, we can't discriminate on the basis of race, ethnicity, you know, all the areas of protected class the federal government sets. We can't be prejudiced for or against. So what we have to do is just do outreach and support people who have been historically shut out and lower the barriers that have prevented them from accessing homeownership. So we do find that a fair number of BIPOC people apply to our program and purchase homes through our program. That's why we have a 57% BIPOC homeownership rate.
And one last question, at least for this round. In terms of ownership versus, I know some of the scenarios that have been presented so far include also some rentals, and that's balanced against the home ownership. How is that determined? Is sounds like your primary goal is ownership. So is the rental arm is sort of, I don't know, a financing decision that you decide because the rentals sort of subsidize the ownership? Is that what happens?
Yeah, there's two different ways that we can go. One is that Homestead could be the developer of your project. The other is that our partners, edge developers, thank you. The other scenario is that our partners, edge developers, could take the lead as a for-profit entity. If they took the lead, they would likely do a combination of rental and home ownership. And the advantage of them doing it in partnership with us is that they would do a project that doesn't involve as much subsidy, and therefore it could be completed faster. So that's why we gave you, and I've got we can get into those scenarios in a minute, but that's the main reason, is that the rental building is something that they would build and continue to own and operate. And the proceeds, the income that they would generate from that would help subsidize the affordable homes, and we could get a project done more quickly. But we can go into deeper affordability if Homestead is the developer and make things all affordable, or not all affordable, but more affordability if Homestead's developer. And that in that case, it would be all home ownership, and plus the church building, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Joanne, are you ready? Great. I know, so hard to see.
Yeah, okay. Would this be just using the parking lot area, that 6,500 square feet of land? Would that be used for this project?
My understanding is that the church is interested in redeveloping the whole property, so not just the parking lot.
Some of the church is
Right.
interested in developing the whole property. A lot of us would just like to develop just the parking lot, which is just 6,500 square feet.
Okay, thanks for that information.
Okay, other questions?
Hand on the phone. Kathleen, I have had a number of folks come back to me and say the homelessness crisis in our city and our county is enormous, and this decision to emphasize ownership does not address issues of kind of endemic poverty. And yes, that is true. Can you just kind of in a brief way, and I know you've touched on this, but just really speaking to that contingent of people, can you talk about the power of emphasizing this particular group of folks with this particular income level and enfranchising them into an equity building ownership model, and why that's worthy of our attention on top of our attention to those folks who are experiencing sleeping outside? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it might interest all of you to know that many people who have incomes that qualify them for our program are homeless. Let that sink in for a minute. They are not the people that are camping on the street. They are people who are unsustainably doubled up with family. And we actually have brought people into our program who are homeless. So I think that's a really important factor to consider as you think about the homelessness problem. The affordable housing spectrum is a progression of categories of income, from zero income all the way up to that 80% of area median income. And there are different types of housing that help people wherever they are on that spectrum. So I like to think of it as a conveyor belt that you enter the affordable housing spectrum at one income, but that affordable housing spectrum really should be moving you up and out and into self-reliance and self-determination. And the challenge is that people stabilize in rental housing, that subsidized rental housing, and they have nowhere to go when they experience an increase in income. The gap between what they're paying in rent is too high. The gap between what they're paying in terms of rent now and market rate rents and market rate homeownership, it's too big a gap. So we're creating this problem of not enough housing, not enough income appropriate housing in all the different income categories we need to serve. The closed door report that I showed just a minute ago shows that this income category, this 50 to 80% income category is underinvested. There's an enormous buildup of need for this income category that if we released the pressure and allowed more people to move into ownership, you would free up a comparable number of homes that are affordable to lower income people. The final thing I'll say about that is that one of the reasons why people are homeless and are in poverty is because they have been denied the opportunity to build intergenerational wealth through ownership. So when we give lower income people the opportunity to stabilize in place, build wealth, we are creating that stability, we're creating that platform for them to move up on the conveyor belt and move on up and out of the system of having lack of assets and lack of stability in their lives. Pastor Andrew, I hope that answered the question.
Yes, it did. That was exactly what I wanted to hear someone say out loud. Thank you very much.
Okay, Anita?
And I'm muted, so, I had a question about the HOA fees. I think a number of us have been in situations where at HOA all of a sudden became enormously high because there were unexpected repairs that needed to be made and that sort of thing. I assume these residents in general are close enough to the line that a sudden increase in HOA would be problematic for them. How are people protected from that? And what are the average HOA dues?
So when we do pricing on a home, on our homes, we take into account an estimated amount of HOA dues so that when we're price setting, that is always taken into consideration. However, you are right to worry about it, especially if in a building where there is a majority of market rate homes, because the market rate homes will feel, people who can afford the market rate homes will feel less limitation on increasing dues than if it's a majority affordable building. So we're sort of getting down a path. I think the short answer to your question is we take it into account and we make sure that they are affordable and that there are constraints on dramatic increases whenever it's a fully affordable development. There's a lot more we could say about that subject, but I think the short answer to your question is we're paying attention to that. We make sure it's not a big issue. I do have some other slides. I don't know how time constrained you are to the 2:30 end time, but I want to make sure that we finish kind of having the conversation I think we need to have.
Oh, we would love that.
Let me show my screen again. So in terms of this process, I just want to be sensitive to a comment that was made earlier that there are differences of opinion about what needs to happen, and to make sure that Homestead is not, we're not seen as siding with one group or another. We're responding to the information that we're being given, and we want to be fully responsive to the church as a whole. We were contacted on February 18th. We met with the committee, I did and Evan, and we were given specific notes to provide the proposal that we did. And we were asked for a proposal for a March 5th congregational conversation. This is just, I just want to point out, this is a ridiculously short period of time to ask a housing developer to come up with a comprehensive set of options to meet your needs. So it was really just a conversation starter. Nothing's cast in stone. Congregation is not obligated to anything. These are the notes that we received. Since I'm going to provide the slides, I'll share those with you so that you know exactly what we were asked to respond to. The early learning facility was not a must-have. That's why it was not included in the original concepts that you received. We came back with a quadrant of options that we really quickly threw together based on information that we had available. And what we are showing here is that mix of all ownership versus ownership and rental. The slower process being driving more affordable homes, the faster process being less affordable, but still some affordable. And it's really about what's your tolerance for how long a project could take, that when we develop affordable housing, the funding part of it happens through annual applications for public subsidy. And if we don't get 1 year, then we have to go back another year and apply again. And so it can take 3 to 5 years to complete an affordable housing project if it's fully funded. The good news is that since since we submitted this proposal, the state of Washington approved an historically high amount for affordable homeownership in the last legislative session. So there will be more money available at the state level, which is great news for a project like this. But that was not the case, and we didn't know that it would be the case when we submitted the original proposal. So given that, subsequent to our creating this proposal, there have been a number of questions, number of concerns raised. I'm putting on my former hat as church consultant and saying what we need from you is a sense of your clarity about discernment, about mission and calling. And the fundamental question that I need to hear, we need at Homestead and Edge to hear is based on that question of who are we together and to what are we called as a body of Christ. So lots of congregations come at this idea of developing affordable housing from kind of a place of desperation about their physical plant and money. And they think, oh, if we could just get rid of this older building and maybe get some money for our land, we can find a different place for ourselves as a church. But that the question that should be before you is, to what are we called as a congregation? And I personally believe, and I don't mean to like step on Pastor Andrew's leadership at all. This is not calling into account his leadership. But
preach, girl, preach.
Thank you. But I mean, I just put on the screen like what some of the potential options are for how you might be called. I don't know what your calling is, but are you called to collective justice work, for example? Are you called to foster community? Are you called to youth ministry, like your early learning facility? Are you called to create housing security? And if so, for whom? Do you want a homeless shelter on your location instead of home ownership? How are you called? And back in the day, I mean, before I came to Homestead, but also for a number of years after I came to Homestead, I facilitated processes like these with churches where people ask these questions as a process for then determining, okay, well, depending on how we're called, then we answer the question, what are our physical space needs? One church for whom music was a fundamental part of their calling said, okay, what that means then is we need to have an acoustically magnificent gathering space that will be supportive of all kinds of musical performance and musical worship. That was very clear for them as a result of a process of discernment. And that's just one example. Other folks really felt called to ministry to the hungry. So when that's the case, then you say, oh, well, then we need a place where we can have a kitchen and we can do community suppers or community lunches. We can feed the hungry in our neighborhood. So it's these questions about who are we called to be as a faith community, and how you figure that out that determines what the building should look like. So I'm encouraging you to ask those questions of yourselves. Don't get hung up on details of what it looks like. Go talk to each other about the work you feel called to do collectively, and then do the process of saying, okay, what that means then is we need to let go of certain things in order to fully move into that calling as a church. So I'm just going to let that sit there for a minute because I think that's pastoral work that Pastor Andrew needs to be engaged in. I'm going to just briefly go into what I'm showing on the slide right now is a process diagram of how we do affordable housing development. And I will send you these slides so you don't have to take notes, but it is a really detailed, methodical, sequential process that moves from A to B and has lots of different phases. And it starts with community vision, finding and securing land, getting money to do the studies that help us figure out what's possible on the site. We can't, for example, fund the church's exploration of multiple scenarios in a sort of we'll know it when we see it kind of process. We need to have clear direction from you as to the elements that you really are committed to so that we can then design and do the cost estimates for that specific design and figure out how to make it pencil. From there, we go into land use approval and building permit applications. All along the way, while we're doing land use and building permits, we're doing those funding applications to get the money to build the project. And then we have to go out and get a construction loan. We have to do the construction and then we have to sell. But then we stay in relationship with the project forever. That's the Community Land Trust model, is that we would own the land and we would continue to be in relationship with both the church and the housing forever. And the action steps, what I would foresee as your process is, let's go back. I think if I may say so, a group of folks who are really committed to moving something forward have provided some initial ideas to get the conversation started. And the conversation is started and there are some options on the table. But now the work about what you want to do needs to go back to the church about what are you asking this process to provide in terms of physical assets to support your work as a church. And I can work with Pastor Andrew on a process for the congregation. I can design it for you. I can't facilitate it for you, but I can give you some structure around how to have that conversation quickly and get some options that you can then submit to the congregation for consensus. After you have that clarity and you know that you want to move forward, I suggest then that we enter into an MOU so that we're clear on what you want to do, we're clear on what we want to do. But after that, then we can start doing more scenario development with an architect and some consultants. Through that process, we can pick a final scenario, determine if it's green lights on both sides. Then we would enter into a purchase and sale agreement. And from there, it would go into the rest of that development process of the full architectural design, which would be in partnership with you, land use, building permits, fundraising, construction, financing, construction. So those are the steps going forward. So I'll stop sharing so that we can see each other and you can give me some feedback about that and how you'd like to proceed.
Wow, that was really useful, Kathleen. Thank you. So questions or comments? Again, use your hand raising or yeah, someone just said, Laura Cook just said, as with anatomy and physiology, form follows function. So definitely. So raise your hand or use the chat if you're asked. Oh, go ahead, Laura Setkus.
So two kind of procedural questions. One is, as we as a congregation come back and discuss what our vision is, on a practical level, and this may be impossible for you to answer, given the size of our land, is there a kind of boundary in terms of space that we may be able to use for our church? So that's one question. Sort of square footage, I guess, is what it would amount to, or a percentage. And then the second question is, as we go through the MOU process, is there a point at which most of the folks who work with you would need to be represented by somebody who actually does like land use law, or, you know, since none of us have really done this, will we need counsel at some point?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, we're working with another church in a similar process, and they do have an attorney. And we have attorneys, obviously, that we can bring to bear. But the need for counsel is greatly diminished when you're clear on what you want. So that's and clear on your calling and clear on what physical assets that requires. In terms of the boundaries, yeah, there are all kinds of land use limitations, setbacks, permissible uses that the city constrains us to. And so the initial ideas that we shared were very quick calculations of how much housing we could do with all those constraints in mind. But it really takes the commitment of dollars of having an architect really look at it before we can be super clear on those constraints and limitations. There's a couple things to keep in mind. For example, when you bring the early learning facility back in, one of the requirements of having early learning facilities is that there's open space, outdoors, secure, and there's parking. So that puts a cost burden on the affordable housing that parking and that secure open space that's set apart from other open space on the property, it has to pay for itself, essentially. It can't be financed from the affordable housing, which we're already subsidizing. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And then I guess the question, as I framed it, was actually a little bit more in the context of how much, and this is separate and apart from the early learning, approximately how much space could the church afford to have? I know your quick pencil out was discussing about 3,000 square feet total. And I'm thinking as we have this conversation, we may end up saying, no, we need more space. And there's got to be a limit on it. And I don't know whether you're able to define any sort of a limit of square footage or percentage or anything like that.
There are too many variables at this time for me to give you a clear answer on that. So you currently have a building footprint of 5,000 square feet. Obviously, if we wanted to go vertical with that, the footprint on the ground would be one thing. But then one of the questions that we engaged early on is your worship space can't be 30-foot ceilings. And because then that limits the amount of housing on top of the church building that you can build, because we can only build up to a certain height. So what I would say is, don't put that as a constraint on your discernment about calling. It's just actually, COVID is a wonderful thing for all of us to realize how we are church without a building. So that this experience that we've just had of not being able to gather, but being church anyway, is really instructive and should help free us up from attachment to the physical space in the same way we were attached to it before COVID. That said, you will legitimately have need of physical space for your church. I'm just not clear on how you're called and what that means for your physical space. So I think just more discussion on that. Just don't worry about square footage or size at this point. Lean into the question about who you are together in Christ first.
Okay. Thank you.
Elise?
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Kathleen, for this. It's a lot of information, and I think people are anxious of the unknown, and no matter what our church's future is, it's going to be unknown. I just want to recognize that and just kind of sit with that feeling, and we're going to have to feel that no matter what we do next. And I like the idea of having a full church with a vaulted ceiling and perfect acoustics. But if we are going with our church mission, from what I can tell, we've been with the church for 2 years, Mike and I. The church mission has been to serve those less fortunate, to the food banks and the clothing drives, and supporting homelessness and partnering with Operation Night Watch. That has been the majority of the mission that I've seen. I mean, I don't know if we have a pure mission statement. I haven't actually grasped that. But I know that a lot of the work we do is supporting those that are less fortunate, marginalized communities. I love this project. I love the idea of this. I do recognize that we're going to have to downsize ourselves in order to provide the best this project can be. Because if we are asking for too much, then it's taking away from the purpose of the project. So I just wanted to acknowledge people's anxiety, and it's going to be a difficult road this next few months and few years. But I do think it fits with what Admiral Church is. And it feels right to me, and I hope it feels right to other folks. But I just wanted to thank you for all of this information and your time and commitment towards our church.
Yes, we appreciate you, Kathleen. Other questions or clarifications or comments? Okay, I had just one question. You have said that the Land Trust is particularly focused on home ownership, and I admit to having a pretty strong bias in the direction of home ownership for its leverage ability. But what are the reasons for affordable rentals? Because that was at least a couple of the scenarios, one or more. So how do you see that?
The primary, so there's obviously a need for affordable housing, and the rental projects really are a means to build something more quickly. So there's a need for the housing.
Okay.
It's really a funding mechanism to get a project done. So that's primarily why they were in the mix. And again, it's when the rental shows up, that's because it's an edge developer led project versus a homestead led project.
Okay, great. Thank you. First, and then Pastor Andrew.
Most of our church was dedicated as memorials in perpetuity. How does that figure into this whole scenario? And I've only been a member for 63 years. So my husband and I were married in the church, and we knew most of the people whose memorials were given in perpetuity. How does this end that?
I think that becomes one of the things on your list to carry forward in the new space. How do we do that? You know, when I've followed like Plymouth Church for a number of years, it's one of the churches that I've consulted with. And in spite of their iconic building in downtown Seattle, they've actually had 2 other locations. And so they've carried forward that sense of history from building to building in a beautiful way, you know, with incorporating their stained glass windows in the current building, you know, from the older churches and things like that. There's an Episcopal church in Lower Queen Anne that has a place for, you know, a remembrance garden for people whose ashes are stored there. So, you know, if that's the case, obviously we can create a similar space going forward. And it just has to be on your list of here's what we need in our new building to go forward. But I think memorializing and carrying forward our ancestors and the people who have built the congregation and its work over the years is entirely doable in a redeveloped space.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we are a little bit over time, but I want to make sure everybody has, oh, Andrew, you had your hand raised, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I guess the question I had was about timeline. So I really appreciate all the things you said about mission and having a clarity of purpose for the church. What's the church's gift? Who are we here to serve, and what is our service? I think those are absolutely critical questions that we need to be at least broadly in agreement around, and that needs to be what directs how we organize, right? To Laura's point about form following function. And so in order to do that work justice, I guess I got the impression from the report back that we received from the folks that did research and had conversations with you that it was pretty important for us to like really start this process with Homestead in very short order. And while I still believe that it is for a variety of other reasons, I guess what I am curious about is if we needed to spend a while in discernment about really getting that clarity, what kind of time frame would you need to be on with us if we decided to go ahead and to work with you? Do you have you need to get in the pipeline relatively soon? Do you have any limitations on that? I know your organization probably only has so much capacity for development at any given time. If you could just speak a little bit to that, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not in any big rush. So I apologize if I gave the impression to the group that I was working with earlier otherwise, but you know, there's no time frame that we are on that would mean you either hit this deadline or we're not able to work with you. That said, I would say the following, which is that you've been in discernment for a long time. This conversation has been going on for at least 4 years, and it's time that you come together and make a decision. And it's a bit of a prophetic word, and I apologize that it comes across harshly, but people are paying attention to you, and people are saying, oh, Admiral Church, they're still not ready to go. And it's important that you come to closure and commit to your calling. You know, with all the grace that comes from everybody dealing with COVID and like the whole world being upended 2 years ago by dealing with the pandemic, it's time. I mean, I participated in a meeting with you and the City of Seattle representatives 2 years ago, right? So I think, Pastor Andrew, I think this is a leadership question for you and the council to firmly lead the congregation forward in discernment and get closure on how, even if it's just simply, we're not going to do anything, but we're going to stop pursuing something. It's really about you all coming into consensus through discernment, prayerful discernment together. And we're here to keep talking to you about it, but we can't, I think that the limitation that we have is that we can't pay money to architects and subconsultants to inform your process. You need to come with clarity first, and then we will invest money. But we can't have you be ambiguous and unclear about what the congregation's commitment actually is. I hope doesn't sound harsh.
Oh yeah. No, I think I will never tell a prophet not to preach. And I think that you are saying true things. We have been in discernment about this for years. We had been working on this for quite a while before COVID. COVID has given us some grace. We decided not to talk about this for a great deal of the time that we were dealing with COVID. And you are 100% correct. It is time. I think we know what our core values are, and we need to get together and decide that this is what we're going to say, who we are and what we're about. And we need to do that this year. Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay, last call, I think, for questions. Peggy, did you have, or questions, comments?
No, I just appreciate Kathleen's being with us. And I know that we have a very serious vote coming up next week, and look forward to having everyone participate.
Okay, Joanne, one last question or comment?
Yes, just the fact that the feelings of the community surrounding the church is against this program, that it will be an uphill battle to convince the community that this is right for their community. When the church was first built in 1909, the city had appropriated space for a church in that community, as well as the schools and other areas, residential and so forth. So this is part of the original city design. And I think that there will be an uphill battle to get this done, just as a warning. I know that the community is not for us developing the program.
Okay, thank you, Joanne.
If I just want to say one thing in response to that, and then one thing as a parting kind of prayer for you. Our process is the way Homestead develops our projects. We do involve the community. And so you getting clarity as a church about how you want to go forward is step one. As we journey forward together, we would, of course, reach out to the community and say, this is what we're thinking about. This is how we would like this project to serve the community's needs, and to build engagement and build support for it. Homestead doesn't come in and just do whatever we want in community because we're nonprofit and we feel entitled to do home ownership. We only do projects where there's a lot of support and endorsement from the community. And we think that's possible if we are in dialogue with the community. So I just tossed that out. And our projects in Phinney Ridge, I think, are examples of that. But I just also want to say, God is calling you to great things. I can really see Spirit at work in this conversation and in your church. These are important times. It's important that you listen deeply for that call of how are we called to be church in this time, and be willing to step into what you hear. But I'm excited for what you will hear and discern together in love. So I just encourage you to go forward with that conversation. And I'm here as a support, and let me know how I can support your process.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kathleen. We appreciate your time and incredible fluency in this new area for many of us. So thank you.
Well, thanks.
Okay, so I think we'll say goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks to everyone for coming.
Goodbye
Bye-bye.
and thank you.